some men carry guns, some carry gold. But Elijah Cross carried something far heavier, a folded piece of paper with words his dying wife made him promise to read every single day. For 30 years, that paper never left his pocket, and for 30 years, he never believed a single word she wrote. Until the night he finally did. The desert has a way of keeping secrets, burying them beneath the rust-colored sand and holding them there until the wind decides otherwise. I know this because I watched a man named Elijah Cross walk these plains for 3 decades, his boots wearing paths through the dust, his heart carrying a weight that would have crushed lesser men. I first saw him in the spring of 1923, riding into the town of Copper Valley on a horse the color of thunderclouds. He was not a young man even then, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around eyes that held the kind of sorrow you do not ask about. He dismounted outside the general store, and when he reached into his coat pocket, I noticed the way his fingers lingered there, pressing against something hidden, something precious. That was when I learned the story, piece by piece, from old-timers who remembered and from the man himself on quiet evenings when the whiskey made his tongue loose and his memories sharp. Her name was Clara Mae, and she was the daughter of a preacher who had brought his family west in 1892, chasing the promise of gold and finding only the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory. She had hair the color of wheat at sunset and a laugh that could make the coyotes stop their howling just to listen. Elijah was 24 when he first saw her, standing outside the small chapel her father had built from salvaged timber and pure stubborn faith. He told me once that he knew in that single moment that his life had been divided into 2 parts, everything that came before Clara Mae and everything that would come after. He just did not know then how short that second part would be. He courted her the way men did in those days, with patience and persistence and a respect that bordered on reverence. He brought her wildflowers from the mesa, purple and yellow blooms that she pressed between the pages of her Bible. He helped her father repair the chapel roof after a storm tore through the valley. He learned to sit through Sunday sermons without fidgeting, though he had never been a particularly religious man. It took him 6 months to work up the courage to ask for her hand, and when he did, his voice cracked like a boy half his age. Clara Mae laughed that beautiful laugh of hers and said yes, before he could finish stumbling through his prepared speech. They married in the autumn of 1893 when the desert painted itself in shades of gold and amber, and the air carried just enough chill to make you grateful for another body beside you at night. The preacher cried during the ceremony, though he would deny it later. Elijah's own father had passed years before, but he swore he felt the old man's presence there, approving of the match. For 7 years, they built a life together on a small patch of land east of Copper Valley. The soil was stubborn and the water scarce, but they made it work through sheer determination and the kind of teamwork that only comes from loving someone completely. Clara Mae could coax vegetables from ground that others had abandoned as useless. Elijah had a gift with horses, training them with a gentle hand and a patience that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. They talked about children often, planning names and futures, but the years passed without that particular blessing. Clara Mae refused to let it sadden her. She told Elijah that some people were meant to be parents to the world, not just to their own blood. She took in stray animals, taught reading to the children of neighboring ranches, and treated every living thing with a kindness that seemed boundless. I believe that was what made the ending so cruel, that a woman with so much love to give would have her time cut so terribly short. The winter of 1900 came hard and mean, with winds that cut through wool and walls alike. Clara Mae developed a cough in December that she dismissed as nothing serious. By January, she could not hide how weak she had become. Elijah rode 3 days through a blizzard to fetch a doctor from Prescott, nearly losing his own life in the process. The doctor did what he could, which was not much. He spoke words that Elijah refused to hear, terms like consumption and final stages and making her comfortable. Elijah threw him out of the house, then sat beside Clara Mae's bed and wept like he had not wept since childhood. She lived until February, each day stealing a little more of her light. Elijah did not leave her side except when absolutely necessary. He read to her from the Bible she loved, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. He held her hand through the long nights when her breathing grew labored and her skin burned with fever. On the morning she passed, the sky was clear and blue, a cruel joke of a beautiful day. She woke just before dawn, clearer than she had been in weeks, and asked Elijah to bring her paper and pencil. Her hands were too weak to write, so she dictated to him, and he copied down every word through tears that blurred his vision. When she finished, she asked him to fold the paper and put it in his pocket. Then she told him to read it every day until he believed it. He promised he would, though he did not understand what she meant. She died an hour later, with her hand in his and the first rays of sunlight touching her face. He said she smiled at the end, like she could see something beautiful that he could not. They buried her on the hill overlooking their land, beneath a cottonwood tree where she had liked to sit and watch the sunset. Elijah carved the headstone himself, cutting his hands on the rock more than once, because he refused to stop until it was perfect. The blood mixed with the stone, and he told himself it was fitting that a piece of him would remain there with her forever. For the first year he did not leave the property. He tended the animals and the garden she had loved, but he did not speak to another soul. The neighboring ranchers came by with food and condolences, but he turned them all away. He was not yet ready to exist in a world without her. But every night he unfolded that paper and read her words by candlelight. The paper grew soft from handling, the creases deepening, the edges fraying. The pocket where he kept it wore through, but he simply moved the paper to another pocket and kept going. I asked him once what those words said. He was silent for a long time, staring out at the desert with those ancient eyes of his. Then he told me she had written that he was the greatest gift her short life had given her, that the years they shared were worth more than 100 years with anyone else, that she did not want him to spend the rest of his days mourning what was lost, but celebrating what they had. She told him that love does not end with death, that she would be waiting for him when his own time came, but that she did not want him to rush toward that meeting. She wanted him to live fully, to find moments of joy, to let his heal, even if it kept her memory close. She wrote that carrying grief forever was not honoring her memory. It was imprisoning himself in a past that could not be changed. She asked him to promise that he would try, truly try, to find happiness again. He told me he read those words every single day for 30 years, and for most of that time, he did not believe them. The grief was too heavy, the loss too profound. He wandered from town to town, taking work where he could find it, never staying long enough to form connections. He became a ghost of a man, present in body but absent in spirit. But something changed in him around the 25th year. He was sitting in a saloon in a town whose name he had already forgotten, reading her words for the 9,000th time, when he finally heard them. Not just the sounds they made in his head, but the meaning behind them. Clara Mae had known him better than he knew himself. She had known that he would carry this burden far longer than he should, and she had given him these words as a key, a way out of the prison he would build for himself. He started small. He complimented a barmaid on her singing voice and meant it. He helped a young father fix a broken wagon wheel without being asked. He sat on a porch and watched a sunset without comparing it to the ones Clara Mae would never see. He began, slowly and painfully, to live again. By the time he arrived in Copper Valley, he was ready to stop running. He took a job at the livery stable, working with the horses that had always understood him better than people did. He rented a small room above the blacksmith shop. He started attending Sunday services at the little church on the hill, not because he had found God, but because the singing reminded him of Clara Mae's voice. And then, in the autumn of 1924, he met Eleanor. She was a widow herself, 10 years younger than Elijah, with 2 half-grown children and a ranch that was falling apart faster than she could repair it. She came to the livery stable with a horse that had thrown a shoe, and Elijah fixed it without charging her because he could see she did not have the money to spare. Their courtship was nothing like his first one. There were no wildflowers or nervous speeches. There was only the quiet understanding of 2 people who had been broken by loss and were slowly putting themselves back together. She did not try to replace Clara Mae, and he did not expect her to. They simply recognized something in each other, a resilience that had been earned through suffering. He showed her the paper on their 3rd evening together, unfolding it carefully, because by then it was more tape and faith than actual paper. She read Clara Mae's words with tears in her eyes, and when she finished, she took Elijah's weathered hand and told him that she thought Clara Mae would approve. They married in the spring of 1925, in the same little church where Elijah had started attending services. Eleanor's children stood beside them, cautiously hopeful, and the whole town turned out to witness what everyone agreed was nothing short of a miracle. The old ghost who had wandered into their valley had become a man again, and they celebrated accordingly. Elijah lived another 23 years after that wedding, years filled with the kind of ordinary happiness that Clara Mae had wished for him. He helped raise Eleanor's children, then their children in turn. He became a fixture in Copper Valley, the old man at the livery stable who could calm any horse and who always had hard candy in his pockets for the little ones. He kept the paper, of course. It remained in his pocket until the day he died, transferred from one worn piece of fabric to another as his clothes aged and we replaced. But he no longer needed to read it every day. The words had become part of him, woven into his bones, guiding him toward light even in the darkest moments. He passed in the winter of 1948, peacefully in his sleep beside Eleanor, who followed him 6 months later. They were buried side by side in the Copper Valley Cemetery, but Elijah had made one request that his family honored. On his headstone, beneath his name and dates, they carved a simple message. She was right. I think about him sometimes when the desert wind picks up and the sand dances across the plains. I think about a young man falling in love beside a hand-built chapel, and an old man finally learning to live again in a dusty frontier town. I think about the paper that traveled in his pocket for 30 years, growing more fragile with each passing day but never losing its power. Clara Mae knew that grief could become a cage if you let it. She gave her husband the key to his freedom with her dying breath. It just took him 3 decades to learn how to use it. The desert keeps its secrets, but this one deserved to be told, because somewhere out there, someone else is carrying their own worn paper, their own burden of loss, waiting for the day when they finally hear the words that have been written for them all along. And when that day comes, I hope they remember Elijah Cross, the man who carried his wife's last words in a torn pocket for 30 years. He was proof that it is never too late to honor love by choosing to live.